Well, I just want to say hello to everybody out there, and thank you very much for joining us. This is Off the Record, an FBI agent's perspective, and we are going to be spending the next several episodes and several weeks going inside some of the more interesting criminal cases that you will hear about. And not all of them are those that you might have heard about. Some of them are things that you were not aware ever happened. But our star on this podcast is going to make it interesting. He's going to teach you a lot. And when you're done, you will not only know how the FBI investigates cases, you will learn about some of the more interesting criminal cases in our nation's history. Off the Record, an FBI agent's perspective. My name is Clark Donnelly. Jesse Hemmelgarn Taylor is my co-host, but our true star there, Harry Trombitas. Harry, it's good to talk to you as always.
And good to talk to you guys. Again, I have to snicker when I hear star because I look at myself far from that category. But obviously, it's about some of the cases that I've worked over my career, and I want to stress, I think, in this podcast that I don't consider myself to be an FBI agent extraordinaire. I'm just a regular FBI agent, worked violent crime mostly my whole career. These cases came about, and I was either fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you want to look at it, to be able to work these cases and help in the investigation. And I want to make sure that again, that people understand this is not a one-man band here. I always work with a team of investigators, local, state, and federal. So this is not about me. This is about the cases, the teamwork that went into getting some of these heinous crimes resolved. And so, having said that, I think it's important to give you a little bit of background about myself, just so people kind of know, a little bit about how I got started. I was born in Alliance, Ohio, and which is in the northeastern part of Ohio. I come from a family where my dad was a millwright at the American Steel Foundries in Alliance for over 35 years. He married my mom in England during World War II, and they came back after the war and moved to Alliance, or actually lived in Alliance. And unfortunately, my mom passed away when she was just 39 years old. I was only 8 years old at the time, and it had a pretty profound effect on me. And my dad did remarry 2 years later, but those were difficult times for me growing up. And I miss my mom dearly. My dad did remarry, but it was difficult on my stepmom to try to fill the shoes that my mom vacated, and it was difficult for me as well. But we got along. We did the best we could with each other, and I ended up playing a lot of sports growing up. You know, football, basketball, baseball, and running track. And back then, you played whichever sport that particular season was. So if it was football season, you focused on football, basketball. And it's not like today where, I know I'm running my grandkids around or following them as they play different sports, all over the central Ohio area. So it's a little bit different than when I grew up. And I always fancied myself as a pretty good basketball player, and modeled myself after Pistol Pete Maravich. He was my hero in a sense, basketball hero. And I always wanted to, play like he did with the fancy passes and the great dribbling and all of that kind of stuff, and the scoring. And then my senior year of high school came, and I developed a benign tumor on my femur, left femur. and it wiped me out my whole senior year. So any chances of any scholarships pretty much went out the window. And yet I still had the desire to play basketball. And my coach wrote a letter to Fred Taylor at Ohio State and told Coach Taylor about me. And Coach Taylor invited me to walk on with the Buckeye basketball team. This is back in 74 and 75. And I never was good enough to make the varsity. I was more of a practice player, but it really left a mark on me and developed some friendships that I still have today playing that. I also needed to make money because I was a walk-on basketball player. That meant I didn't get any kind of scholarship money or anything like that. So I had an agreement with my parents that I would pay half my college and they would pay half. And of course, back then it wasn't near as much money as it is today. But so I needed to work somewhere, and there was a opening for student security at the Ohio State University Police Department, and I applied for the position and I got it. And what they did was they put me on a bicycle and gave me a walkie-talkie radio, and my job was to ride around on the bike and look for bike thieves and car thieves. And if because I was a student, I blended right in. People the bad guys didn't pay much attention to me. And so when they were in the process of stealing the bike or the car, I would radio in and give my location and description of the bad guys. And once they had completed their action, had actually stolen the bike or the car, my fellow police officers would move in and make the arrest in that. And that's kind of how I got my feet wet in the law enforcement area. Up until that time, I had been in pre-med in college at Ohio State. And once I started to take the chemistry and the advanced math and things, I knew that, that was not something that I wanted to work on because it just didn't come easy for me. I was more interested in criminal justice and in talking to some of the other police officers on the police department. They all had criminology degrees and sociology degrees and things. So I changed my major to criminal justice, and in 1978, I graduated from Ohio State. But one thing that happened while I was there is I was introduced to my wife, Barb, and she was eating down in the cafeteria at Baker Hall on South Campus at Ohio State. And one of my buddies introduced me to her, and we hit it off right away. And, we dated for about 4 years and ended up getting married in that. So, that was another, besides my degree and walking on at Ohio State, one of the greatest things that happened to me was meeting my wife, Barb.
At that point, you also met a friend or mentor, if you will, somebody who inspired you to take the next step in that law enforcement career. Tell us a little bit about that guy.
Yeah, when I was working at the Ohio State University Police Department, there was one of the officers by the name of Jim Russell. He went by JR. Kind of took me under the wing and taught me a little bit about police work, how things were done, and we struck up a relationship. And he really helped me significantly. And when he took a position in Evanston, Illinois, as assistant director of public safety at Northwestern University, he brought me along after I graduated, and I became an officer and also a crime prevention specialist. Now, we were city commissioned in Evanston, so we had arrest powers in that, but our focus was really on the campus of Northwestern University. And I can remember, being involved in a number of different things, but one of the more unusual ones was I was working one night and we got a call about a individual, a male that was exposing himself at the Northwestern University library. And so myself and a couple of other officers responded, and lo and behold, we saw a guy run away from the window, and obviously figured out that that was him, that was exposing himself to a group of co-eds. And because I was pretty good shape and that, I was able to run up, catch him, and hold him, while we arrested him. And then when I went back to do the interviews of the co-eds and that, this guy had been standing there for at least 15, 20 minutes, pressing himself against the window. And the co-eds were so fascinated by what he was doing. Nobody called the police until finally somebody said, you know what, we better call the police on this, because this is too weird. And so then they finally called, and so that was one of my first arrests. We called it, the people that did that, they were weenie waggers. And so I guess one of my first cases I was involved in the arrest was involved a weenie wagger. So anyway, sure. Well, cop humor, and anybody in law enforcement, and I'm not saying it's the only job that has kind of dark humor or off-color humor, but when you're a police officer and you see so many horrible things and you're involved in such serious matters and that a lot, that I think a coping mechanism that we develop is to make light of or to laugh about things. And, again, it's not to be, mean-spirited or anything like that, but it helps us break the seriousness of what we're involved in. And so we call it cop humor. We see, funny things, and no matter what happens, again, not to be disrespectful at all, but it's just a way for us to handle not going crazy, I think, basically, because some of the things we see are just, people should not see what we see sometimes. And so, again, I think, throughout our podcast here, you're going to find that I'll interject some humor into the stories and that. And again, that was, something that we did just to maintain our sanity, I think. So, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, to illustrate that point, while you were at Evanston, the Unabomber became active. I believe that was where his case began. And you know of an FBI agent who was actually injured in one of the early Unabomber incidents.
Yeah, in 1978, I think at that time, 78 or early 79, Ted Kaczynski, later known as the Unabomber, sent his first bomb to the campus of Northwestern University and to a professor there. And the professor did the right thing, called the police department. I wasn't on duty at that particular time, but one of my fellow officers at Northwestern in Evanston responded, and we had very little training on explosives and things like that at that time, way back in the late 70s. And so the professor showed him where the box was that came in the mail, and he went up to the box and very carefully tried to open it, and the box exploded, and it caused him to be burned and injured on his hands and on his face. He was lucky he didn't lose an eye. So the bomb actually exploded, and we never were able, I mean, the FBI, ATF, everybody responded, the city police department responded, tried to work together, but we never were able to solve that case. And it was later in my career where I actually worked on the Unabomber case that I found out that, in fact, that was Ted Kaczynski's very first bomb that he sent through the mail was to Northwestern University. So in a way, I'd come full circle. You know, I'd worked and been, you know, by geography, I guess, if you will, there at the time that the very first package was sent, to the point where I'm actually following leads and trying to track down Ted Kaczynski.
So the next stop on the path is Creighton University, and that a couple of important developments occur while you're at Creighton. Talk to me a little bit about that next big step in your career and in your education and in your preparation to become an FBI agent.
Yeah, my friend JR again took a position out at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska, as the public safety director, and he asked me to come along with him and help start organizing the department. They had a security guard outfit, contract service that patrolled the campus before, and the university wanted to go to a more professional police kind of agency or public safety department. And so JR and I went out there to Omaha. This is in 1983. And let me, can we edit that one out? It was it was 1979 when I went out there. But so JR and I went out in 1979 to the university, Creighton University, and literally started the public safety department from the ground up. We hired a couple of other individuals to serve as supervisors, and then we put the department together and became the public safety department and patrolled the campus and the surrounding Omaha area. And you know, it was quite a great experience for us to be able to build a department from the ground up. And while I was working, I kept noticing a couple of guys that would come into the department and ask for permission to park at the law school. And I struck up a relationship with the guys and found out that they were FBI agents. And we started talking about my background in that. And by then I had already received my master's degree in counseling and psychology in 1982. And so they said, hey, you've got a master's degree, you've got great law enforcement experience. Have you considered, you know, a career with the FBI? And I said, no, I hadn't, because my understanding was you had to be an attorney or an accountant. And I said, I'm not either one of those. And they said, no, now we have a program called the diversity program where, you know, people with law enforcement and advanced degrees can apply and, you know, they'll be accepted into the FBI as long as they pass the required testing and everything. So, you know, I haven't really considered it because I didn't think I'd ever be eligible to apply, but I've always held the FBI in high esteem. And truly, even to this day, believe it is the premier law enforcement agency in the world. And, you know, the things that our men and women do on a day in and day out basis, you know, just incredible work. And, you know, I can't say enough about the job that they do every single day. So I took my test. Somehow, as you know, through the grace of God, I was able to pass that written test. Then I was called in for an oral interview consisting of 3 FBI agents asking me different questions, situational type questions. What would I do if this happened or that? Asking me about my allegiance to the country, you know, asking me, you know, what my career goals would be if I came into the FBI, and would I be willing to give up my current career where I was, you know, working at Creighton University? And, I answered absolutely immediately. And I thought, well, this is probably about as far as I'm going to go. I can't imagine that I'm going to get accepted, but lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, I get a letter in the mail that said, "Congratulations, you're now a conditional FBI agent. Report to FBI headquarters on July 10th, 1983, in Washington D.C." And so I was officially apparently going to be an FBI agent.
So, 1983. So Ronald Reagan's in the White House. Michael Jackson is bad. Cheers is where everybody knows your name. And a strapping young fellow from Alliance, Ohio, by way of Omaha, Nebraska, is now on a bus headed for Quantico, Virginia, right? Because that is where the FBI Training Academy is located.
Yeah, and I'll never forget the day, again, July 10th of 83, all dressed up in my suit. I had flown into DC, taken I don't know, taxi or something to headquarters, and walked into the J. Edgar Hoover building. And, I see this group of like dressed individuals standing in the lobby of FBI headquarters. I could tell right away that they were probably also there for the same reason why I was. I saw an older guy standing in the middle, and I went up and introduced myself, and he welcomed me to the FBI, and he said, "Hey, hang out here for a little while. We're going to wait till everybody gets here, and then we're going to bus to Quantico, which is, a 75-minute bus ride away to Quantico, where the Marine base is." And so we hung around in there. I met some of the other agents to be, and struck a relationship with a number of them. Some were a little quieter than others, but there was that camaraderie already developing, even in the lobby of the FBI building.
So that's new agents class 8314 is how you were designated. And so then, you're off, you're on the bus, you arrive at the training academy in Quantico, Virginia for 16 weeks of training in classroom, firing range, in self-defense. Tell us, take us through that process to a certain extent, how an FBI agent is trained to do things the FBI way, how you benefit from the experiences of the agents who've gone before you, all of which comes together in this 16-week preparation course that, transforms you from the public safety officer at Creighton University to Special Agent Harry Trombitas of the FBI.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting path. We were designated 8314 because we were the 14th class, FBI class of 1983. So every FBI class has, starting with 83-1 or, whatever the year is, and then dash, first class, second class, and so on. And so we were bused to Quantico, and the bus let us off in front of the Jefferson dorm, and we went inside, and we kind of got situated. They gave us our materials and things, and then we were sent up to our dorm room, where you had another suite mate, if you will, and introduced each other and talked, and got settled in like you would at any dorm room. And then we were set to begin our training. And as Clark mentioned, there were three main areas of concentration: your classroom work, where they taught you everything that you needed to know about how to work the cases, federal criminal procedures, how to do all of those things, how to write search warrants, arrest warrants, just conduct yourselves as an FBI agent. The other two areas were firearms training, and we had some of the best instructors in the world that would teach us how to use a revolver, which is what we carried at the time, a shotgun, and a submachine gun. And again, very intensive training. There were qualification courses along the way that you had to be able to master and pass. And so it was by the time we were done with our firearms training, we had shot thousands of rounds. So we were pretty proficient and pretty much had the confidence that we could shoot whatever we were aiming at or hit whatever we were aiming at. The third area is your physical fitness. And so you were expected to be in good shape when you arrived at the FBI Academy. Matter of fact, we had to take a physical fitness test prior to being selected for our appointment. And the FBI tested you on 5 major areas. You got your push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, the shuttle run, which is, to go back and forth through a series of cones as quickly as you can, and then the 1.5-mile run. And everything had to be timed. You were given a score. The points were 1 through 5. You needed at least a 3 in each one of the areas that you were being tested over. And you needed a total of 15 points in order to pass the physical fitness test. And so there was no going down in bad shape and trying to get into shape. You had to be in good shape when you hit the ground at the academy. And then you were expected to progress and get better and better and better. And so you couldn't just rest on your laurels and say, hey, I passed the test, the 6-week test, I don't need to do anything more. They made sure that you continued to progress. And it was actually one of our instructors had indicated that said, look, this is a sterile environment down here at Quantico. You're on the Marine base down here. There's really nothing for you to do. You can't leave. You're basically there. You might be able to sneak out a little bit on the weekend if they didn't have some kind of exercise or whatever plan. But the only 2 things you can really do down here are study and do physical fitness. So I remember him telling us that, and it was really true. I mean, every day we went to class. We did all the things that we were required to do. We did our firearms, our physical fitness during the day. The testing, we did, defense tactics and, arrest procedures, able to put handcuffs on somebody, a combatant individual, for example. And we did all kinds of wrestling. We did boxing. And, that leads to another humorous story for me anyway. I was, when you were in the gym and you had, you usually paired off with somebody about your size, and that way you can kind of work together and have somebody your own size that you're practicing the techniques on in that. And I was teamed up with a guy by the first name of Juan, and he was the Pennsylvania State Golden Gloves champion. So when it came time for boxing, Juan and I would square up, and of course we had headgear on and everything, and gloves, and we'd go. We had to go, at least a minute round, sometimes 2 or 3 rounds, and so we'd start off boxing, and Juan would play with me for a little while. I'd get a couple of punches in and think I'm doing really well, and after a little bit, Juan would get tired of my annoying behavior, and he would reach up and he would flick my headgear so that the ear pads came and covered my eyes, and then he would just pummel the shit out of me. I mean, the punches hurt, but by the time we were done, we were both laughing because it was so comical, what was going on. And the next day, the same thing. He let me get a few strikes in, a few punches in, and next thing you know, he'd flick my headgear around and he
And
went to town on me.
you knew what
So
was coming.
it was but it was good. And the men and women fought each other too. So the women had to take punches from men and of course try to get punches to the men, and that it was really for two reasons. One, so that the women in our class, the female agents, knew that they could take a punch and continue fighting. And it wasn't, they wouldn't go down. They were, they were able to maintain their composure and focus on what they needed to do. And it also helped the male agents because we were, taught to really, you don't hit a woman. And so you're very hesitant to do anything to hurt somebody, especially a female. And it helped us overcome that. Females, hey, when we're out on the street, working, females can be just as dangerous as males as well. And so you've got to treat everybody the same way. And, if you're in a fight, you're in a fight for your life. So you can't worry if it's a woman or not. You've got to do what you need to do to control that person so you can handcuff them or do whatever you need to do. And so it really helped both the women and the men to be involved in the boxing. And I will tell you, I have run half marathons before. I've played college basketball. I've done a lot of things to stay in shape, but I have a new appreciation for people that are in the ring and are boxing, or now to this day it's what is it, MMA. MMA.
Yeah.
You can say I'm a good follower of that, but yeah, MMA. And boxing was the most tiresome sport I had ever done in my entire life. And to sit there for a couple of minutes, and just beat the heck out of each other and, do that in, 2 or 3 rounds, I was physically exhausted. And so I have a new respect for anybody that gets into a ring and engages in that kind of combat, because you have to be in incredibly good shape to be able to, go for the distance, I guess. So, it's funny too, because our class we were best of friends, but when we got in the gym and we were boxing and wrestling, I mean, it was all out warfare. We didn't take it easy on each other. Every day coming out of boxing class or wrestling or whatever, we would have people that ended up with black eyes, bloody noses, scratches. It was the real deal. And again, that was all good. It showed us that we could withstand that kind of a situation if we encountered it on the street. And so it really helped drive home the point that, hey, when you're an FBI agent or any law enforcement officer, you got to fight for your life sometimes. And so you better be prepared. A lot of what we did in the FBI, not only in physical fitness, but firearms, where you had to focus on what you were doing and moving from target to target, from place to place, cover to cover. You had to think. And what can happen sometimes is, you're so focused on what you're doing that you're missing out on important things that are going around you. And that could cause you some real serious problems, especially when you're out on the street. You have to be able to focus on what you're doing, yes, but you also need to be aware of the other things that are happening. And, you just, maybe there's somebody coming up from the side that's going to try to hurt you. And that you can't be so focused on one target that you don't see these things. And, the same thing when we're involved in, our physical fitness and the boxing and things. You've got to be aware. You've got to train your mind to pay attention to what's going on around you and what are the potential problems that you might face. You know, you got to take all of that in. And going back to firearms, you know, you got a subject that's standing in front of you and he's about to shoot you. Well, you know, they always say action is faster than reaction. And so that's why a lot of times you'll see law enforcement actually try to take the first shot because they know they're about to be shot. And so they're not, there's no law that says they have to stand there and wait to get shot before they can react. So if someone's got a gun and, you know, they're starting to point it at you, I mean, it's your life and their life, and I want to go home to my family. I didn't choose for that individual to, you know, cause that situation, you know, why I'm there. And so, you know, I just want everybody to go home safe, but I'm not going to just sit there and let myself get shot. It's just not going to happen. But, you know, law enforcement also has the responsibility of, you know, so you got a subject in front of you, but who's behind the subject? Are there children back there? You know, is there a group of people that aren't involved? So law enforcement has those things to worry about, whereas the bad guy doesn't care. You know, it just shoot, you know, and we all know why gangsters carry their guns like this, right? Because that's the way
No,
it came in the box.
that's right. I heard that.
So
Well,
anyway,
but that
so
doesn't, they don't shoot very well when you hold them that way, as I understand. You can't, it's hard to aim when you're holding it like that. Am I right?
you know, you watch, I mean, there's videos of people in gunfights and that, and they're like throwing the rounds down. They're just, you know, they're not, there's no aiming. It's just boom, boom. You know,
So
it's no wonder.
you take all of that out of the classroom, out of the gym, and you kind of put it in a real world scenario with Hogan's Alley, nicknamed the most dangerous town in America. And I think it's one of those things a lot of us have seen on TV or movies. But yeah, the FBI has a real mock up of a real life situation where they'll stay on the street, buildings, houses, whatever. How is that part of your training to kind of hone what you just described and ingrain it into your consciousness so that it becomes second nature too? Look to the left, look to the right, look for your background, look, you know, be aware of what might be behind you and behind the suspect.
Yeah, it absolutely. You know, we have a town at Quantico called Hogan's Alley. It was built there to represent an actual town. It has a bank. You know, back when I went through, it had a bank, a barber shop, little grocery store, a movie theater, and I think some kind of an office. And our job was we had different scenarios that our instructors would place on us. You know, like one day we might be looking for a fugitive, and we got a lead that he might be in the movie theater. So now we have to go in, try to identify him, and then if it's in fact him, to make the arrest. So that's just one example of some of the scenarios that we had. Another one could be somebody just robbed the bank and they took off. And now we have to go in and interview the witnesses and see if we can track down who this individual is that robbed the bank. You know, and so we had all these different scenarios that we were able to practice when we were in Hogan's Alley. And our instructors would, you know, tell us what you know, our goal was, what the mission was. Then we would form as a little team and we would take turns being the team leader. And we'd come up with a plan on how we're going to, you know, conduct our business. And it was incumbent upon us to stress safety and, you know, take appropriate precautions. But on the other hand, you know, we had to be prepared that we may meet somebody who doesn't want to go to jail. And so there was a real possibility that we were going to be facing some pretty tough individuals in that. So, you know, when we would go in and we would try to, let's say, look for a fugitive in a particular building, it just like watching Silence of the Lambs with Clarice Starling. One of the scenarios that she's in as a new agent is they're going in to clear a room and make sure the bad guy's not in the room. And so Clarice is going in and she's with a partner and they're looking, and all of a sudden Clarice gets shot in the back of the head and with a like a paintball gun. And she realizes that she had made a mistake by not clearing, looking back in the corner of the room that they were in. She hadn't cleared the room appropriately. So that's the same kind of thing that would happen to us if we made a mistake. We paid for it, and the whole idea was so that we would make the mistakes and that in training, but we would go home and be able to live another day because we learned from our mistakes in training. Oh, absolutely. Very, very helpful. And you know, to this day, law enforcement, they do scenarios, all the time on all kinds of things, just to prepare for incidents that might happen. And I know part of our classroom discussion on that, how important it was to work together as a team and to be prepared and to think about the possible problems we might encounter. And it paid off tremendously later in my career. I was involved in 3 shooting incidents. Fortunately, I was not the one that was getting shot at, or did I have to shoot. But I'll tell you what, it's pretty melancholy when you start hearing gunfire close to you. It's, you know, so, that all paid off not only for me, but for my classmates, and I'm sure for other law enforcement officers. These scenarios are critical because they get you to practice doing the right thing, and yet understanding that there are hidden dangers that you have to look out for. So I think it was very critical throughout my career.
As we go on, and if you listen to more episodes of our podcast, folks, you're going to hear scenarios like Harry described. Only those are going to be those real life situations where those Hogan's Alley lessons come into play and save lives. But it's not all getting punched by Juan and crashing through doors. That's right. Yeah. And then crashing through doors in Hogan's Alley. The boardroom was an interesting part of the FBI training experience that I was unfamiliar with. And it does sound a lot like a college dormitory, Harry. It's the place where you all kind of gather, you let your hair down a little bit, you relax, you have a few drinks, but it creates a very entertaining visual image in your book that you have written about what sounds like a common area in a college, where there's a couple of nice women, behind the bar, they're cooking your pizzas and serving you drinks. Was it important for the agents to unwind at the end of every day like that, where they could just compare notes, maybe just like a college student would, study? I think you mentioned in your book that you've written that they practice their handcuffing techniques in their off hours, which is not something a typical college student does.
Yeah, that's true. And it's very stressful. Let me start off by saying it's very stressful. I know in my situation, as an example, when I left for Quantico, Barb and I had been married for 4 years, and we had just had our son, who was 3 years old, and we were living in Omaha, where we had no family, really, just a few friends and neighbors. So I was going off to start a new career, and I'm wondering, am I making the right decision here? I mean, poor Barb's at home with the baby, and there's really nobody there for her, and I'm here starting a new career, you know, and then I'm thinking, I'm second guessing whether I did the right thing, because I had a great job at Creighton and it was comfortable, and it was a very good situation. So you have all those doubts, and I'm sure all the other new agents have the same feeling that you have to, you've made a commitment here, you have got to succeed, and there's no going back at this point, because there's no guarantee you're going to have your job that you left. And so it's critical that you focus, and I know that one thing I didn't mention was in the classroom where we had to take tests, and we learned all about the different categories of the crimes and things that we had to work, and how to do the investigation and that, and the federal rules of criminal procedures. You got tested after every subject, and you had to score an 85 or above on your test, or they would send you home. They put you back on a plane and send you back home. So not only are you worried about, did I make the right decision? What's going on with my family? But now I've got to pass these tests. I got to pass my firearms. I've got to pass my physical fitness standards. All of that pressure is on you, and there's really no release until about the 12th week of our training is when we're allowed to visit. The FBI new agents are allowed to visit what was called the boardroom. And again, like Clark said, that's just kind of like a small bar with, a couple of little TVs in it and a place to unwind. But up until that 12th week, once you passed your major tests in your 12th week, you were allowed to go to the boardroom. But before that, you spent your evenings, what we call dry firing with red-handled weapons. Red-handled means they were safe. The firing pins were taken out. But we sat there and practiced our sight alignment and trigger pull every single night. We practiced handcuffing techniques with our fellow classmates. We'd even get involved with, and one thing I want to mention is at the same time that new agents are going through training, there's a group of students that are called National Academy students. These are made up of law enforcement professionals from around the world who come to the FBI for executive type training. And so they're there, we're working with them. Sometimes we're pulling a raid on with somebody's dorm room, and with the NA, and next time they're raiding our room, and it's a lot of fun, but practice that's going on. But the National Academy or the NA students had an advantage. They were already professionals, and so at the end of their evening, they had rigorous training and everything during the day and classroom and all of that. But at night, they could go to the boardroom and unwind. We couldn't do that. And we couldn't do that until the 12th week. And so, you had to, I think we let off the stress and everything by working out and practicing and engaging with our classmates in that. But, and then occasionally there were like 3 phone booths in the Jefferson dormitory. Actually, in all of the dormitories combined, I think maybe we had 4 dorms, so there would have been four phone booths. And every night you had to go to a phone booth if you wanted to call home. We didn't have phones, in our rooms and things like that. So, you had to go to a phone booth and make a call back home. And sometimes you had to wait in line to use the phone. And, it's kind of old school situation there. But, that's how we were able to communicate with our families and that. And finally, on the 12th week, once we had passed our big legal test and our firearms, big firearms test, and our final fitness test, we were able to relax a little bit and hit the boardroom. And the boardroom was, again, a small bar, above the cafeteria where all the agents ate. And they have, tables set up in there where you could sit and talk with your classmates or, the NA students and that. And I remember during the time that we were there, the World Series was being played. And so it was pretty interesting to go in, and we just had these little tiny TVs above the bar where we, try to watch the World Series and that. And in the boardroom, not only could you get, something to drink, beer, wine, mixed drinks, but you could get food as well. And it was just simple food, snack food, bar food, maybe a burger, maybe hot dog, some French fries, something like that to go along with, when you're drinking and that. And we had these two, they were precious, two women, older women, probably, I don't know, 50s and 60s at the time, which sounds pretty young now, but kind of like grandmotherly ladies that worked in the bar in the boardroom. And they, you'd go up to one of the ladies and you'd, get your drink, you order your drink, and then you'd order food, and, you'd pay for it. And then you'd get a receipt back if you ordered food, and it had a number on it. And they had, you'd go back and sit down, and then when your food order was ready, one of the ladies would go over to the microphone and call your number. And you knew that your food was ready and needed to get up there and get your food and, bring it back to eat at the table. So I remember, many funny incidents. I remember one time the National Academy class, at the end of their 11th week, they had designed team class T-shirts, basically. Every class did this, and they had, like, a quote that was important to their class, something somebody said, something that somebody did, but they would put it on their T-shirts, and that was like their class T-shirt. And they'd wear it their last night that they were going to be at the academy, and they'd wear it into the boardroom. And I remember one class, their T-shirt had a I don't know, a beer logo on the front, like holding a pitcher of beer. The T-shirt said, from the NA to the AA in 11 short weeks, and that was their little class slogan that they had. But on this one particular night, I remember we were crowded in. NA class was there. This new agent classes were there. We were all gathered into the boardroom and watching the World Series game, and it was very, very loud this night. I think the one class was going home, and so everybody was in a good mood, and you could hardly hear yourself think. And when the food orders were ready, the ladies would go over to the microphone and call out the number. Well, I remember distinctly one time where a food order was ready, and I remember hearing one of the sweet ladies, go into the microphone, number 27. And nobody went up to get their food. And, a minute or so later, she gets back on, number 27. And nobody got up to, nobody could hear her. And so nobody got up to get the food. And you could tell she's now getting a little stressed. And she's like, number 27. And nobody could hear her, and she's going, number 27. And I sit close to where the lady was, so I could hear her, but nobody else apparently could. And so the bar is so noisy and everything. And she finally gets so frustrated. She goes, number 27, pick up your fucking pizza. And all of a sudden, the entire boardroom gets deathly quiet. And apparently it got the attention of number 27, who went up to the bar to get his food order, and everybody in the whole bar booed him because he wasn't paying attention.
Yeah.
So anyway, these are little, they may not sound like a big deal but when you're there and you're caught up in the moment and you're under so much stress, and then like we talked about a little bit, Jessica, with the cop humor and that, there things that you look to find the humor in some things, and this was certainly one thing that I still remember to this day. And I was there in '83.
Uh, so on that note, and now that number 27 has their pizza, it's time for you guys to graduate. Tell a little bit about the graduation process and then your initial posting when you find out where your first assignment as an FBI agent will be.
So when 16 weeks is over and we've all passed our required subjects in that, it's time to prepare for graduation. And at the time in 1983, the FBI had a policy where they would send you back to the office that you processed in from. So in my case, I knew I was going back to Omaha for my first office of assignment. It's not like that anymore, but that's the way it was back then. And so they'd send you back to where you processed in from, and then you would go to what they called a small to medium-sized office where you would be able to get your feet wet and work in a smaller city and a smaller area. And then once you had that experience, you went to a top 10 location, which was one of the top 10 largest cities in the United States. And everybody was required to put in big city time. And so, but at the time, again, going back to my situation, I knew that we were going back to the office we processed in from. So I knew we'd be going back to Omaha, and the other students all knew where they were going to be going because, they had the same policy that I had. And so graduation was something that you look forward to. It's a situation where the director of the FBI, some of his underlings come down to Quantico, and they call your name. Well, actually, they first have you recite the pledge or the oath of office, and you go through that oath of office. You have to raise your hand, and as your entire class, you stand up and recite the oath of office. And then once you've done that, they call you up individually and hand you your credentials. And then you typically get your picture taken with the director of the FBI, who was William Webster at the time, who also later on became the CIA director as well. But unfortunately, Judge Webster was not going to be able to make it. He had another commitment. So we were going to have an assistant director actually hand us our credentials and that. But it was really a big deal. Families would come in from all over the United States to be there in the auditorium. So when their loved one received their credentials and that, they were allowed to clap and all of that, and show their appreciation for what their loved one had done, the commitment that they had made and the hard work they had put in. So it was really a big deal. And I kind of made a mistake because I told Barb, I said, Barb, it's just going to be really a quick ceremony. It's not really a big deal. And what I was thinking of was she has, at that point, a 7-month-old child. She would have to fly on a plane down to Quantico, and it was just going to be for what I thought would be just a very short ceremony. And then, we'd have some light dessert afterwards. and we'd be heading on our way back to home. And during the ceremony that day when we graduated, and I saw all the pomp and circumstance and, everything that was, we had culminated in all this hard work that we had done, and now we were going to graduate. I really felt kind of sad that I had not had Barb and maybe some other family members come down, because I think it would have meant a lot to them. And, I just didn't want to, put her through the hassle of travel and everything. So I kind of missed out on that family feeling, the celebration and all of that. And I regret that to this day. But, again, I was trying to do the right thing at the time. And so,
Yeah.
missed out on that. So, yeah, when I got called up on the stage, it was an assistant director that handed me my credentials, and we shake hands, pose for the camera, and get a picture taken, and then you go back and sit down, and there's usually a class spokesman, and they usually give it's kind of a recap of the training and that for family members to understand what happened. And then we have class counselors, and they're the ones that we go to during the training, the 16-week training period. And some of the training, some depending on what time of the year that you go through the academy, some training is 16 weeks, some is 17, some as much as 18. And this is back then, because if you had training during a holiday season, maybe like Christmas or something, your time off was longer, and it would cause you to go into a 17th week, and sometimes almost into an 18th week. And so the length of training actually varied, but you had the same subjects and everything. Everybody had to pass everything, So, but some people were there for 17 weeks, some almost 18 weeks. So depending again what time of year. And then, once we said our goodbyes to everybody and after graduation and got our luggage and everything, it was, taking a taxi or actually it was a bus to the airport, and you'd get on a plane and you'd head back home, and now you were official FBI agents. And of course, there's always funny stories that happen when you're flying. And I just mentioned one because it reminded me my very first trip back as an FBI agent back to Omaha. FBI agents have to go through a screening because we're required to travel armed. And so we have to go through a special screening, show our credentials, all of that, to make sure that people know that, we're going to go around the gate. We don't want to go through the metal detector and have it go off and cause concern. So we go around. They call the law enforcement officers up from the that are stationed at the airports, and we go through showing identification and that, and clarifying that we are in fact FBI agents and we're armed. So then they walk us around the gate, and again, it's they're very careful of making sure that only legitimate law enforcement officers are the ones that they're escorting. And then when we get to the plane or to the gate, we're supposed to identify ourselves as, FBI agents, and, make sure they understand that we'll be flying armed, and they understand that. And usually we get on the plane at that time, we would get on the plane first, and the gate attendant or flight attendant would walk us down the runway to the plane and introduce us to the captain and the crew, make sure that everybody knew that if there was a problem or whatever, I was an armed FBI agent. And the FBI has jurisdiction over, at least at the time, and I believe they still do, if there's an incident aboard an aircraft while it's in flight, FBI has investigative responsibility. And so if something would happen, I would need to step in and, act in whatever fashion was necessary to protect people and certainly the plane. So it was important that the flight attendants and the crew knew that they had an FBI agent on board. And so I remember my first trip back, brand new FBI agent. I went through the process and I went ahead and, I took my seat, which was in coach. You don't fly first class as, as a government employee. So I took my spot and I'm, sitting there and the plane is full and it's just getting ready to taxi out. And I see a flight attendant at the front of the plane talking to another flight attendant, and they're looking back. I'm about in the middle of the plane, and they're looking back in my direction, and I'm going, oh geez, I wonder what's going on. And the one flight attendant kind of points in my direction, and I'm going, oh geez, I hope I didn't do anything wrong in that. And this one flight attendant comes walking down the aisle, and no kidding, she goes, as she's walking down, she goes, "Hey, are you the the FBI agent?" And everybody in the plane's like, it was like, well, I guess everybody knows now.
Yeah, there goes your undercover career.
If there's going to be anybody that's going to cause some kind of malfeasance on the plane, they know who to take out first. I mean, you just never know what's going to happen. And that was one of the incidents that I remember on my very first flight back to Omaha.
All right. So freshly minted FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas in midair, outed by the flight attendant now. And we're gonna wrap it up there. And Harry, we appreciate everything that you've told us. Really fascinating insight into what goes into training and preparing an FBI agent for the career ahead. And Harry's career is fascinating in itself. On other episodes of this podcast, you will hear him talk about mixing it up with serial killers and the Geraldine Bandit and other nefarious bank robbers. He will be handling abductions and just a number of other cases. And you're going to hear that training coming into play over and over again.
Again, don't look at me as the example, but as they say, even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while. But I would recommend anybody that has an interest in learning about the FBI and what the qualifications and things are. And again, keep in mind that there's more positions in the FBI than just special agents. There's different kinds of analysts and other kinds of positions that are open to anybody to apply. Typically, to be an agent, for example, you have to be between the age of 23 and 37 to apply. You have to have at least an undergraduate degree. A lot of our new agents have advanced degrees, but it's not mandatory. And we really take people from all walks of life. So in my case, I was law enforcement. You can have a military background, a teaching background. You could be an accountant, an attorney. We even had a couple of pastors that joined the FBI and that back when I was going through. So, it's really important that the FBI has a diversified workforce to represent, what our country is today. So, again, any interest at all, go to the FBI's website, fbi.gov, and take a look at the different positions, what the requirements are. I will tell you, it is the career of a lifetime. I cannot tell you how interesting my career was. Again, nothing special about me, just the things that I got involved in, the things that I saw, the other law enforcement professionals that I I worked with, and you know, it was all really working towards a common goal, and that was bring justice to the victims and hold the bad guys accountable. And you know, we may not get paid a whole lot. You'll make a comfortable living, but you know, you're not going to be rich. But the reward factor is out the ceiling. It's incredible, the satisfaction that you get from being an FBI agent. So would highly encourage you to consider that.
All right. It's a good career advice. We're going to wrap it up. My name is Clark Donnelly. Of course, Harry Trombitas is the star of our show.
Off the Record, an FBI Agent's Perspective is created and hosted by Clark Donnelly, Harry Trombitas, and Jesse Hummelgart. Produced by Jesse Hummelgart. Stories in this podcast are inspired by Harry Trombitas' autobiography, Dark Places, about his time in the FBI. Music is called Cruise in the Back and is available on Storyblocks. You can find this podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube, and on our website.